Neil Young once said, if you're going to put on a record at 11 in the morning, don't put on Tonight's the Night. Put on some Doobie Brothers. Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. This is a great episode because it is one that you chose. We had a poll up in our community section where we put up 4 choices, 4 records, and asked for you guys to vote. Pick which one you wanted to hear a kind of a deep dive episode on. And the people have spoken. It was close. It was a close election. We're familiar with that, right? We had about 45 people actually participate in the voting, so thank you if you did. 40% of the votes went to Neil Young's "Tonight's the Night," which is, of course, what we're covering in this episode. 38% went to Cream's "Disraeli Gears." It was real close. 13% for King Crimson's "Discipline," and then 9% for Devo's debut, Q, "Are We Not Men? A, We Are Devo." All 4 albums, amazing and awesome. That's why I picked them as the choices. I would have been happy talking about any of them. But the people have spoken. Neil Young's "Tonight's the Night." That's what we're going to cover. One of the most harrowing albums in rock and roll history. I think we can agree on that. I guess it would help if I actually showed you the record we're going to be talking about, right? "Tonight's the Night." There's the band. We'll talk about them in a minute. There's the inner sleeve. "Tonight's the Night." Yeah, like I said, one of the most harrowing albums ever put out. Just raw emotion, adrenaline. I mean, and a lot of it has to do with the background, and we'll get into that as well. Some of it is famously off key. It's off kilter. It's tired. It's weary. It's beautiful. I mean, "Tonight's the Night" this is one of those records that I think you put it on over and over again. Maybe you don't listen to it for a while, then put it in and just discover it anew. And it just hits you like a ton of bricks. And Neil's warning to maybe not throw it on, mid afternoon or late morning. I don't know. I can listen to it anytime, I guess, but yeah, it's probably better as a late night album when you're alone. But it is awesome. It is awesome. So a little bit of background. So this was recorded in 1973, but it wasn't put out until 1975. And it is commonly viewed as the third record in what is known as the Ditch Trilogy. And though the other parts of the Ditch Trilogy being "Time Fades Away," "On the Beach," and then, of course, rounding it out with "Tonight's the Night." Neil didn't record these records, with that in mind. They are just sort of loosely connected, more, I think, by kind of mood than anything else. And maybe, the condition Neil and some of the musicians were in at the time. It sort of became referred to as the Ditch Trilogy a little bit later, mainly from a quote that was, I should have pulled this down, that was in the liner notes of the amazing 3-record set Decade, Neil's first and best compilation. And he wrote some interesting liner notes in here, and one of the quotes, I wrote it down here, he was talking about "Heart of Gold" and talking about "Harvest," which had been this huge hit. And he said, well, here, bring it over here so I can read it to you. Said, "Heart of Gold put me in the middle of the road. Traveling there soon became a bore, so I headed for the ditch. A rougher ride, but I saw more interesting people there." Pretty well-known quote from Neil. And I think it's from that quote that we get this whole Ditch Trilogy terminology. So, tonight's the night. A big part of the background here is two pretty important people in Neil's life had died very recently, both from heroin overdoses. Drug abuse, of course, was rampant in the music industry at the time. One was Bruce Berry, who was a roadie. He had been a roadie for Neil and also for Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And then the other was Danny Whitten, who had been the guitarist for Crazy Horse, right? Neil's probably most celebrated backing band. But Crazy Horse had also been its own band. And Danny Whitten, had been the leader of Crazy Horse without Neil. And then when Neil sort of brought him in as his backing band, Danny Whitten sort of became the rhythm guitarist, basically. I guess occasional lead, but Neil took most of the leads. And so Whitten and Bruce Berry both died from heroin overdoses. And that obviously impacted Neil in a huge way. Record companies waiting for another, after the gold rush, another Harvest, another kind of mainstream folk rock hit. And Neil starts delivering, Time Fades Away and On the Beach and this. And disappointing to the record company, confusing many of his fans, especially the ones who maybe got on board with Harvest. But over time, all, but especially Tonight's the Night, have become incredibly appreciated. Tonight's the Night is considered a masterpiece, and I agree. I mean, I can't think of any record that's more raw, just out there. Putting the artist putting themselves out there, warts and all. And I've read several books about Neil Young. There's a great biography that I would highly recommend called Shaky by Jimmy McDonough. I don't know how you say his last name there. Shaky. It's pretty fascinating stuff. And also Neil's actually written several books, but my favorite is his first one, is Waging Heavy Peace, which is a really fascinating kind of stream of consciousness, almost autobiography, but really a great read. He addresses the Tonight's the Night era, quite a bit as well. I forget where I got this, but reading the Danny Whitten situation, Neil had just fired Whitten from the band, basically, the band that Whitten had been Whitten's band. Because of his unreliability, his addictions. Neil, of course, felt bad about it. Gave him a bit of money. It's kind of a severance, whatever. And the story goes that money was used in part to buy the drugs that he overdosed on. So there's kind of that guilt there, with Neil as well. So the band is an interesting band. It has the remnants of Crazy Horse. Billy Talbot and Ralph Molina. The rhythm section from Crazy Horse. Ralph San Pedro isn't on board yet, and it's supplemented by Ben Keith, who was a long time Neil collaborator, playing pedal steel and some other stringed instruments. I think essential to Neil's sound on a lot of these records, and a very young Nils Lofgren. Most people know as part of Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, right? But Nils played with Neil too. Nils also had his own pretty successful solo career in his own band as well. He was really young at this point. I mean, Nils was a teenager, and was already kind of had a reputation as this guitar wonderkind, right? But typical Neil brings Nils into play in this group, but not to play guitar. He wants him to play piano. Nils Lofgren never played piano, but Neil's like, play it anyway. So, which is like so Neil. He dubbed this group the Santa Monica Flyers, and that's the group that backs Neil up. Now, Almost all of the recording sessions, for this record were after midnight, after much drinking. I believe tequila was one of the favorites at the time, and obviously some drug use too. And you can hear it. I mean, these sessions are drunken. Like I said, Neil's sometimes more wobbly than he usually is on vocals. Sometimes they get a little off key here and there, but it all contributes to this great record. It like makes it better. It's so good. It's because there's just something so captivating that brings you in here. Um, so a couple things. Let me kind of show you a few things I have related to this, and then we can talk about the songs a little bit. Um, there were many versions of "Tonight's the Night." Producer David Briggs, famously talked about hating. He thinks this was a compromise. Hating what eventually came out, because Neil basically held it back and tinkered with it for about 2 years before putting it out. And so there were a lot of different track listings and things. I found some record fair. I found this acetate, which was a version of "Tonight's the Night," and it's pretty good. It's got some alternate kind of takes, um, and also includes some songs that, of course, didn't end up on "Tonight's the Night." "Walk On," which ended up on the beach. For the Turnstiles, which also ended up on the beach. "Bad Fog of Loneliness," which is never really came out on an official Neil release, although it's been put out on some archive stuff. "Winter Long," which ended up on Decade. And "Traces," which is another one that was sort of a lost Neil tune from the time period. And then the rest of the songs on this acetate are songs that did end up on "Tonight's the Night." Yeah, I don't know how serious this one was. I know, like I said, there were multiple versions put together, and this was one. Neil Young's awesome Archives series. Of course, he has put this out. He did a series of infamous shows at the Roxy before the record came out, but took the Santa Monica Flyers out and just basically played the whole record. And so here's one of those shows that was put out. A drunken mess, but again, awesome. And really, Neil's always funny in concert, just kind of how he talks to the audience and just really just out there, in between song banter that's captured here. And it's basically the most of the "Tonight's the Night" album, although there's a few songs off, and then "Walk On" is added on here too, which tells me that "Walk On" is probably intended for "Tonight's the Night" pretty late in the process, but it didn't end up on there. But yeah, I mean, there's great stories about these shows. I mean, again, drunken. Neil was swigging tequila on the stage, and then he'd pass the bottle around the front rows and take it back and drink some more. They had a wooden Indian statue on the stage with a big, flying V guitar attached to it. And Neil would often sit there and have conversations with the wooden Indian. I mean, it's just really nuts out there shows, and this captures it pretty well. If you have purchased the huge Archives sets, this is Archives Volume 2 on CD. You see all the CDs in there. There is a disc. Here it is. Disc 3 in the set, which is "Tonight's the Night," although it's kind of an alternate version too. Some photos. It's got some really kind of, sloppy drunken outtakes and all of that on there as well. "Everybody's Alone." I'm just kind of giving you some of the different ones or different songs. "Raised on Robbery," which I think is a Joni Mitchell song, right? Yeah, so it's kind of a sloppy cover of that. So that's interesting too. I mean, point is, there are a lot of versions because Neil was tinkering and tinkering with this record. But the final version is here, which the track listing here: side A, "Tonight's the Night," "Speaking Out," "World on a String," "Borrowed Tune," "Come On Baby, Let's Go Downtown," and "Mellow My Mind." Then track 2 or side 2, "Roll Another Number," "Albuquerque," "New Mama," "Look Out Joe," "Tired Eyes," and then a reprise of "Tonight's the Night" at the end. So that as you're probably familiar with is the final track listing. Um, yeah, let's talk about, I guess, some individual songs on here. Of course, the song "Tonight's the Night" directly references Bruce Berry. Bruce Berry was a working man. He used to drive the Econoline, right? Van. And it's a wonderful way to open the record because again, it immediately shows you this is not going to be a refined, polished, thing. It kind of starts this kind of wobbly groove and then stops and then the groove again and stops, and it's just and that's a song that has stayed in his set list for decades since, and turned into epic versions live. um Come On Baby Let's Go Downtown is awesome. It's a rocker. It's a live track from several years prior featuring Danny Whitten on vocals, and it's killer. It's awesome. It's from the Fillmore show, and I think put on there as a tribute to Danny Whitten, and again, as a reference point for these other songs. Um, Tired Eyes. Tired Eyes is this great story, supposedly a true story of several cocaine dealers who were shot and killed. Neil kind of, sort of half speaks it, half sings it. It's just really unique, interesting song. It's great. Um, my two favorite songs on here, though, are Albuquerque and Borrowed Tune. Albuquerque, more musically, it's just that kind of rolling electric guitar. I guess you call it a riff from Neil, and it's just, to me, just captures this record so well. Just awesome. Borrowed Tune, though, it's just Neil on piano and harmonica. That was a song that was added later. You can tell because it wasn't in that Roxy set list. So that, as Neil was tinkering later, that was one of the tunes he I think tacked on. But I love it. Great. It's The title is Borrowed Tune because he literally borrows the music, borrows the melody. It's the Rolling Stones song Lady Jane, and he even acknowledges that in the lyric, in a verse, which I love. I wrote the lyrics down here. He says, I'm singing this borrowed tune I took from the Rolling Stones, alone in this empty room, too wasted to write my own. Which I don't know why. It's like I've always loved that lyric. It's just, again, just sort of acknowledging his state of mind, his physical state, and turns it into this. It's a beautiful song. It's just, because Lady Jane, the melody is a gorgeous melody from the Stones, and he's playing it real sparse on the piano and singing this actually, and the rest of the lyrics are really great. So it's a great song. But yeah, so that's Tonight's the Night. Um, I'm curious, you guys, in the comments, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about this record? You have any memories associated with it? Any of you guys who maybe were old enough to actually see some of these shows on this tour? I'd love to hear memories of that. I've just read about them. I can end with this. I got a lot of books related to Neil Young. This is cool. I know everyone hates Rolling Stone magazine, but this is an interesting collection, basically, of all the articles in Rolling Stone magazine related to Neil Young, and they put them in a book. And it's interviews and album reviews and all that stuff. It was put out a long time ago, so it's not really up to date. I mean, it's 1994 was when this came out, so it's up through the mid '90s. But it has the original album review of Tonight's the Night in here from 1975, written by Dave Marsh. I'll just read a real quick paragraph because I think it really does capture the record. He says, there is no sense of retreat, no apology, no excuses offered, and no quarter given. If anything, these are the old ideas with a new sense of aggressiveness. The jitteriness of the music, its sloppy, unarranged, but decidedly structured feeling is clearly calculated. The music draws us in with the wonderful guitar line crashing through the ominous Lookout Joe, with the steel guitar on Albuquerque, which is gorgeous. The almost folkish suggestion of melody that drives tired eyes, but, and here is where it is new, it also spits us back out again, makes us look at the ugliness on the surface and beneath it. Yeah, I mean, just a raw, honest, amazing statement from an amazing artist who was at his peak in the 70s. So, like I said, in the comments, what do you guys think? Fan of this? Not? Think it's overrated, underrated, whatever. I'm curious on your thoughts. Well, please do subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. It helps us out a lot. Like the videos, hit the bell for notifications, all that. And we'll see you guys next time on Amity Tracks.